Good morning.
Okay,
Thank you for being here again. My name is Amy Delamarter. I'm the sales team leader here at Western Tile and Escrow in Bend, Oregon. We're excited to host this class for our entire Oregon footprint. So welcome everyone from all throughout the state. We're very excited to have Michael Warren present this information. As we know, it's a hot topic. And so I'll let him take it from here.
okay, thank you, Amy. Well, again, this is for the Oregon Forms update. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm involved in a lot of things, obviously, but I did put the arrow there just to let you guys know that I am the district vice president. You guys all have district vice presidents, and that's what we're there for, is to answer your questions. So if you're in one of my counties, which is Klamath, Deschutes, Baker, Union, Wallowa, Jefferson, Crook, all the way up the eastern side, feel free to reach out. Or if you don't know who your DVP is, feel free to reach out to me. This is going to pertain just to the Oregon forms. However, the information and the principles and what we're doing and the changes that's involved in this can apply to the other forms as well. So this is just kind of an agenda of what we're going to go through. We're going to go through the Oregon Forms website on some slides just so you get familiar with it. We're going to talk about the platforms. We're going to talk about what's been updated in the library for mid-year, and then we're going to talk about the clause library. We'll kind of go over the NAR timeline, the rule change, just briefly. You guys are all probably up on that, but just to know what to expect in the upcoming months. We'll talk about Oregon legislation, which comes in January. We'll go through some form examples, amendment to the listing agreement that you currently have, listing agreements as we go forward in contracts, seller non-agency fee agreement, buyer representation agreement, buyer representation amendment, buyer non-agency agreement. Then we'll go through a couple little tools on explaining your value. Then we'll go into the sales agreement and addressing the BAC and concessions. Once we get through with that, we'll do some live examples on the Oregon Forms website to get you familiar with that if you're not. And one section of that is the clause library. And I think that's very valuable, no matter how long you've been in the business, but especially if you are training people or you are a new agent, I think it's invaluable to understand and be able to use that clause library. And then there's some resource links that we'll go over at the end. And then again, we'll do some questions. So when you log in to Oregon Forms website, it's orforms.org, got the link down there. This is what's going to come up. This is the home page. And there's going to be different tabs about the about, training, forms, etc. The question and answer page is really valuable. So feel free to kind of cruise through that, look at that. If you're going through these forms and you have questions, don't hesitate to hit the contact tab and ask your question. Somebody will get back to you. It could be a problem you're having with a certain form. There could be something you're trying to do in a transaction that's you can't find, or you can't see which box to check. It doesn't matter. Whatever your question is, that's how these forms have gotten updates, is by everybody's input. Okay. So this is on the forms tab. The guy's smiling because he's so happy about these forms. But in any case, this is just familiarize with this tab, and it'll talk about our platforms. So you have Dotloop, you have SkySlope, and then you have transaction zip forms. Now, as you're looking at this through the website, if you haven't done any new agent, you can go in here and you can click on whichever tab that you want to sign up for your platform. So obviously you have to have a platform to do your forms. And then within the platform, you have all your files for all the forms. Dotloop and transaction zip forms are a member benefit. SkySlope is not. And it's just because they weren't able to work a deal out with SkySlope. So your company may still use it. It doesn't mean you can't use it. Of course you can. It's just not a member benefit. So, but Dotloop and transaction zip forms, they are. On this particular screen of the website, you're going to be able to preview all the forms. You're going to be able to look at the versions that had just got updated. And if you need to, you can go back through history and see what was updated in January, see what was updated last year to get an idea of what the changes were, if that's necessary. It'll also go, and this is the tab we will do an exercise on for the clause library. So with that, you've got the forms update. This was the very first tab I had open, but it has the information there for what has been updated in this mid-year. And so as you scroll down through that website window, you're going to see all these to the left down there. Those are what has been updated. Now, the difference with this is you can click on, and we'll do this as well. You can click on any of those, and what it'll do is it'll bring down what has changed with that particular form. So the listing agreement or the sales agreement, you can click on it and it'll tell you exactly what has changed. So you can go to that change and figure out how to understand it, what was different from the last form you did. It's important to watch these updates because forms are getting updated regularly. They don't have necessarily cycles. However, they are trying to do it the end of the year and mid-year just to stay up on stuff, but not try to overwhelm people with the changes so that they're current. But they all go off the feedback that you as real estate professionals are giving them to make these changes. So the NAR timeline, August 17th, we all know that happened and what those changes were about. So yes, primarily they were for buyer broker agreements and getting everything off the MLS. The other thing that I think is important to note is that that was the earliest date that the plaintiffs could issue the class action notice. Now, there could be sellers out there that maybe are calling you saying, hey, I got this in the mail or I've seen this. So you need to be prepared on what that's about. And we'll cover that in just a second. But to finish off the timeline, in September, the anticipated motion in support of the final approval, September 16th, deadline for Realtor MLSs to opt in and MLSs to implement practice changes and released party the settlement agreement. And then in November, we're hoping for the final approval. So that could change, but this right now is what the timeline's about. This timeline is on facts.realtor. Anybody can access this. It's a public-facing website and link. So feel free to look at that and look at the timeline because things do change. Okay, as far as the settlement itself, this is what was released August 17th. So this is the class notice. As you can see up here, it says, the Residential Real Estate Commission settlements. If you sold a home, paid a commission to a real estate agent, then you may be part of a class action settlement. Since this is going out and this is out there now, you could very well be getting questions. So it's good. I got the link down there at the bottom. Again, this is a public facing site. You don't have to log into anything. That's the link to it. And you can go there and click on the home, click on the key dates, click on the important documents, all those tabs up there to get yourself familiar. Again, this is just helping you demonstrate your value as an agent so you can answer your seller's questions. But there's also been some notifications that have been brought up that sellers are just getting in the mail. So it's important to be able to direct them to this website so they can do their own research and they don't have to rely on, gossip or anything else. Here's the facts. Okay. So as far as the policy change, everybody's familiar with that. We know what we're doing there. You've got to eliminate any kind of MLS information that has any kind of compensation on it. So that can't be on any MLS platform, can't be in your listings if you're sharing that through the MLS. You can't talk about it at MLS meetings. Anything that has to do with the MLS, it can't be brought up. Now, there's also a requirement to support some non-MLS mechanisms. You just have to be careful. Every office is going to have their own policies. I'm not here to say what you can and can't do on that. You got to refer to your, office policies because everybody's going to do things a little different. Just make sure you're in compliant. But the biggest thing is not to have it on the MLS and not to have any comments relating to compensation on the MLS. We talked about that's for NAR. Now you've got House Bill 4058, and that's coming out January 1st of 2025. So what that's going to do is it's going to three big parts of that bill regulates residential property wholesaling, prohibits long-term predatory contracts, and requires the use of written representation agreements for real estate services. That's very important because not only we're so focused on buyer broker agreements right now, all the listing agreements have changed too. So it's important that you're up on that, you understand what that means. And again, we'll be going through some examples on that, but it's both. So it's not just necessarily requiring representation for a buyer, it's obviously having it with a seller. It seems funny, it seems odd to talk about it because you have to have a listing agreement to do that, but it's the things within the listing agreement that are required that are important. Just to back up a little bit on the long-term predatory contracts, if you weren't familiar with that, there were companies going out to people. They were kind of primarily picking on the elderly and saying, hey, we'll give you X amount of money if you promise to list your home with us at any certain time. And these contracts could be out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, it really had no limit. And what would happen is if an elderly person happened to pass away, then if somebody was trying to sell that property, these people would file these and it would show up on a prelim. And next thing you know, you're owing some company you don't even know anything about some money. So it limits that to a 24-month period. The wholesaling, pretty simple wholesaling. If people are doing wholesaling, they have to also apply with the state and go through some licensing for that. So the one part I highlighted down here that is different from the NAR settlement in a sense is right now, if you have a buyer coming in and they say, hey, I want to go look at house on X Street, you say, great, this is the new change. However you address it with your buyer, they sign a buyer written agreement before you can tour a home with them or before you can do a video tour for that buyer. With the Oregon legislation coming into effect, it's as soon as reasonably practical. So that means if you are sending listings to a buyer and they're asking questions and you're answering and you're giving them additional information, then you have developed a relationship with that client. And so therefore, this is where the Oregon one is different a little bit. They're requiring you have this in place once you've established a relationship. So it's a little bit different than just prior to showing a house. So there's several ways to do that. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to present this buyer broker agreement so people aren't caught off guard. The last thing you do want is to be sending somebody listings for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months. And then all of a sudden, when they go ready to look at something, you say, oh, by the way, you need to sign this. I mean, get that out of the way first. Send them something in advance. Sending them a blank buyer broker agreement to say, hey, look, this is part of the new rule change. Why don't you take a look at this and then we can go through it and get something wrote up. NAR has just released to the NAR directors. I got this Tuesday, I believe, that is what they're calling it is a consumer guide to written buyer broker agreements. And it'll be on the facts.realtor. I didn't have time to put it in the slides and it's not released quite yet, but that's what's going to be released. It's just a fact sheet of answering it to the buyer. Why am I signing this? What is this for? And it answers those questions. So that sending that in advance with your buyer representation agreement, just a blank form to let them review it, is a good way to get your foot in the door when you're just starting to send them listings and starting to enter that relationship. So just remember, there's two different type of requirements we have going on right now. Buyer broker representation before you show a home. January 1st, it's going to be as soon as practical, basically, when you started that relationship. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so settlement amendment listing to the listing agreement. We talked a little bit earlier just about what's required now for a listing agreement. If you currently have a listing agreement prior to August 17th, this is a form you can send to the seller so they know you don't have to change your terms as long as they know what they're doing. If you've got it spelled out, again, your principal broker, your office policies may differ with this. If they're requiring you to change it, change it. But this form right here has the highlighted elements off to the left-hand side there of what's required in a listing agreement. So this is just kind of for your listing agreement. These are the changes. It explains the dates up above, the purpose, why we're doing this and what's happening. So obviously they came out with this and didn't put a hard date. They just said August 2024. So this is just, again, to give to your sellers if you've already currently have had a listing agreement, and they're going to know now that the MLS is prohibiting any compensation to be shared. Exclusive listing agreement. So again, now this is the Oregon forms. The other forms have different, your association might have forms that you use. This is the Oregon forms. There's different ways to do this. This is just an example of the Oregon forms. What this form does, obviously you have your seller, you have your broker, your principal broker, and your term. The brokerage fee. Okay, so these are some of the things that have to be included in the highlighted portions of the listing agreement, that it's fully negotiated. Okay, whatever you guys decide between you and your seller of what you're going to be compensated on, that's the fee. The brokerage fee down starting on line 35 there. Obviously, if it can be a percentage, it can be a set amount. It can be whatever you decide on. So on line 36 there's a box. If this box is checked, buyer, and the buyer is unrepresented, the brokerage fee in line shall instead be equal to blank. So this is where, if you have a buyer that wants to go make an offer on a property you have listed and they do not want to be represented, you can be the scriber. You can get the information from them. They're not represented. You're not representing them. You don't have a relationship with them. But if they're telling you what to put in an offer and you're just the scriber of the offer, it's going to be more work for you. It's going to be more work for you because you're going to have to do this form. They don't have a broker working on their side of them. Again, if this is negotiated between you and your seller and the seller understands it's going to be more work for you, but they don't want to discourage somebody from bringing an offer, you can set an additional fee to do that. Then down below, obviously, the brokerage fee in this section represents the seller amount only. So this is what the seller is paying you as the listing agent, and that's it. This is not saying that they are going to pay any cooperating compensation to a buyer's broker. All right. Again, this is on the Oregon forms. Your association, OREF, there's different ways to handle that if you want to, but I'll kind of explain the theory. The next page here, if this box is checked, an agent is authorized to communicate to a seller's willingness to consider buyer's offer that contain a request for seller compensation. So in my mind, I don't think there's any reason why a seller wouldn't check this box. You are going to have and come up against sellers to say, nope, this change says I don't have to offer anything. I'm not going to. That it doesn't really make any sense to take that stance. Theoretically speaking, if their house is listed for $400,000 and an offer comes in at above price of $400,000 and the same amount that the agent is asking for the compensation, the seller's getting what they're wanting for the house. It's all negotiable. Everything should be brought up in the offer. Let the seller make the best decision they can and counter accordingly. So that's what that box is for. So again, they may choose, no, I'm not going to do it. Doesn't prevent a buyer's agent or a buyer from putting it in an offer. I mean, a buyer's agent's got to do what the buyer's wanting. Even if the seller says, my seller is not going to look at it, they can still put it in there. So that it's still going to come up. So in my mind, there's no reason not to check it. But again, that's totally up to your client. And then the rest of the form here, you obviously have your termination fee if you want to put something in there for the listing. You have which MLS you are putting the property in. You might be a member of multiple. That's where you would check that. And then any dispute resolution. This is all the basic stuff that has been in the forms. This last part, additional provisions. Again, I think this is important to discuss this with your seller for the fact that everything is negotiable. There could be different ways, different things, or different thoughts they have on paying you. And everything's open. You may have a set standard of how you do want to be paid, and that's totally fine. But I think it's good to bring up the additional provisions because it could be a situation where you think this is going to go quick and maybe you could give them if you wanted to give them a discount if you had it pending in 7 days. I mean, feel free to put things in there to make sense in an agreement with you and your seller. That's what that's there for. Okay, non-seller agency fee agreement. So in this particular situation, this is where a seller, maybe you have a buyer, but you know of a seller or a person wanting to sell their property. I got it advertised on Craigslist. You call them and they say, you know what? I do not want representation. I do not want to pay a broker. And then you're having a discussion with them and you say, look, I will handle this. I will draw up the agreement. You can obviously do whatever you want on your end, but for bringing you a buyer, will you pay anything? And they may say yes. And so that's what this form's for. You're not representing them. You could easily come across to seller says, well, I'm not going to pay you a huge thing when I've been advertising this on my own. But you know what? For bringing me a buyer, I'll pay you X. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And this is a form to use for that. What this can do is it's a great way to explain to them what happens during a transaction. And they may end up saying, you know what, maybe I do want agency representation. Again, but if they don't, but they're still going to pay you, this is how you can provide that documentation to the title company or have it for your record. And then that's just the second part of the page, compliance, what they have to do, terms and conditions, damages, just saying that the seller's not bringing any claims against the broker. And then you have their information. And that's really it. It's not saying that you have any kind of relationship with them whatsoever. Okay, now we're going to go into the buyer's representation agreement part. So I'm sure you're probably familiar with this. They've changed a little bit within the past few prior to the 17th date, but primarily they do have this information, but there's a few things in here they don't have. So the purpose of it, obviously, you want to put in there what your buyer's looking for. Again, it's whatever you guys agree on. Now, if somebody's coming in for the weekend and you're showing them two places and it's in the northwest part of Prineville and you want to put that's great. And you want to put it for a week term, that's great. It's whatever you guys agree on. If it's something you do want to, maybe you do real estate all over the state and you want to put that and they're fine with that. Again, it's whatever you want to agree on. I think the important thing is to make sure you understand what they're looking for. Because if they tell you up front, yeah, we're going to look for a house, if we find a bare land piece, yeah, we might do that, but we really want to just find a house. I think it's wise to go ahead and check bare land and maybe put a little criteria in there because that would be, I think, more secure for you and your client, and you can send them both. You can give them your value on both, whatever you guys agree on. Any other objectives, that's what you would put down there. Okay, these two things I think are super important. Now, obviously, you're going to be explaining your value as an agent and what you're going to do for them. But I think it's just as important to let them know, hey, buyers, you are going to be responsible for your duties as well, and go over this with them. The whole thing about this whole change for the settlement and having everything negotiable and having everything transparent is to really go over these forms with your client, whether it's a buyer or whether it's a seller. The duties of the buyer is just as important. They need to know they have to be accountable too. So I think it's important to stress that. When somebody's told what they need, this is what I need from you, it is building a relationship. It's not a one-way street. So feel free to, go over that. Again, the term, whatever you guys want, can't go over 24 months, but you can set it for 3 days, 2 days. You can set it for one afternoon. You can set it for whatever you want. But again, it's whatever you agree on. Compensation at closing, gross sales price percentage, or if it's a set fee, or if there's other compensation agreements. I know it sounds odd, but there can be situations where somebody maybe offers you something else, whatever that may be. It's up to you guys I'm not even going to give an example. It could be anything, but it's important to talk about that. it could be something that you're offering maybe a lesser fee to represent them because you know that they're also listing their place with you. Whatever you guys agree on, okay? Um, Down below, the seller contributions towards agent's compensation. This just gives some options on how it can be paid. And reading this with them and going over this with them, it helps them understand that they can absolutely ask for this within the sales agreement. It could be that the other listing office is already offering it. It could be they know the seller is already offering it. Just letting them know you're communicating this whole section with them about how it can be done, but ultimately they are responsible to make sure that they meet up to their obligation of the fee. Again, totally negotiable, but if you decide to put a termination fee in there, if you are, feel you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people and you've already got the feeling maybe they're indecisive and, you don't know if they're going to really continue with them after putting a lot of work in, or whatever you feel is necessary, you can put a fee in there. And again, if they agree, great. If they don't, you have to work it out with them. But that's what that section's for. I think even if you don't, it's good conversation to bring up. Especially if you're in a rural area, you're doing 20, 30 minutes travel time, you don't work for free. And so feel free to put that in there and negotiate it with them. Again, it's all about explaining your value as an agent. And then once again, additional provisions, just letting people know that they have an option of, what else should we discuss? Is there anything in here we need to add or anything in here that we should have in our agreement to make sure that I'm doing everything I can for you and that you're going to be able to do everything you can for me to get you through this transaction. Okay, buyer's representation amendment, pretty self-explanatory. There's two ways to do this. If you're changing the criteria on a buyer representation agreement, you can terminate the other one and do a new one. Okay, there could be some risk in that. If you terminate it and you don't get a new one put in place, are they going to go somewhere else? Who knows? It's just a risk management deal for you. But this is something, if you're modifying the term or the objectives or anything within your buyer's representation agreement, maybe it's the compensation, other modifications, whatever it is, this is the form you would use to modify your buyer broker representation agreement. Okay, buyer non-agency agreement. We talked a little bit about this before, where you have a listing and a buyer comes in and they do not want to be represented, but they want to make an offer. So this is the form you would use for them. You're not representing them. You do not have an agency relationship. But again, you can be the scriber for what they're doing. Now, it's important to understand relationship and making sure you're not being in a relationship with them during agency and talking to them about what they need or shouldn't do for an offer. Let them give you whatever they want to give you. And I say this for two reasons. If you did the listing agreement and you had your seller and they understood that if you're doing this with an unrepresented buyer, that you're going to have more work, and they check the box, say, yes, we'll pay you additional, whatever that might be. Let this buyer do whatever they want to do for two reasons, because number one, you do not want to form an agency relationship. That's going to put liability on you. Don't give them advice. Let them print out on a napkin any of the terms they want to do. You be the scriber. You put it in the agreement. I guarantee you're going to know right off the bat, you can't put that in there. My seller's not going to go for that. No, they're not going to do that. No, you shouldn't do this. No, you should get a home inspection. Don't say anything because they've asked for this, okay? They asked to do this on their own. They do not want representation. Do it how they wanted. If you have to address anything, address it with a counter. But once you get this offer and a seller is looking at this offer and saying, well, why are they putting all this down? You know perfectly well. You can explain to them, I told you it's going to be more work because of the fact we have to address all this in a counter. But that's why we have these forms, is to protect you. Because without this, it leaves you kind of high and dry. Really, how much should I tell somebody? I don't want them to get in trouble, But on the other hand, I don't want to represent them. I'm not getting paid to represent them. So these are the forms put in place to protect you and to protect the client you are serving. Okay, so you have no obligation to the buyer, but you've agreed to make sure that it's on the proper forms and we get everything legible so the seller can make their best decision. So that's what this form is all about. Okay, as far as communicating your value. So NAR has got these. You may or may not have seen them. If you are somewhere local, I have a lot of these pamphlets. I take a bunch of them every time I go to NAR, but I have these. But you can also download them at the NAR Realtor /brokers. Just go on there. It'll have these. You can download them in a PDF. You can send them to your clients, or you can go through and pick things out of there that pertain to the things that you normally do. Maybe there's things in there you don't necessarily do. But it's a way to present your value as a broker, whether you're covering an agent, selling side or the listing, a buyer side. The 179 ways was primarily put out just because as an overall. The 105 more ways was done more for the buyer side of it. I think a really great exercise to do is to look at your last transaction or any transaction and go from the very first time you picked up that phone, answered their call, answered their lead, answered their email, and write down every single thing you did for that buyer just before you even got him into a house. Those right there give you the baseline. I think it's very easy to take for granted what you do for a buyer or a seller. But with this new buyer broker agreement, it's really important to be able to express your value and let them know and what you're going to do for them and also what you expect from them. And I think a lot of these things you're going to go through as you make your list and you're going to think, oh man, I had to do this and it was so hard because my buyer didn't do this. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you. And in this circumstance, this is what I'm going to need from you. So these are just some resources to help you explain your value. And again, the link is down below. You can go ahead and, download them, send them, whatever you need to do. Okay, so now we're going to go into the sales agreement. So you've got the final acknowledgement page, basic. I don't believe anything changed on this front page at all. Just explains who the buyer is, who the seller is, who's representing who, and the agency. Okay. As you get into the real estate form, and again, this is the Oregon Forms. OREF has their own set of forms. The principles are the same. You may have to use a different form, but the principles are the same to express how a buyer broker is going to get paid. So you have your basic terms up there of how much you're offering, in earnest money, all that. Highlighted down below, you have seller to pay brokerage fees to buyer's agent firm at closing in the amount of X. It's that simple, whether it's a percentage or whether it's a set fee. Okay. Now, if the seller's agent's firm has a separate agreement with the buyer's brokerage, then that's a different line. Okay. But that's an agreement between the two brokerages. The brokerage says, hey, our brokerage will pay your brokerage X. That's where that gets put into the sales agreement. It could be a situation where you have a portion of each. The seller is paying some of it and the brokerage is paying some of it. That would be on line 4H. Okay, that's where you would put those. And then 4I there, the other closing costs, like with the, closing costs from the lender, points buy down, whatever that might be, that's where that would go. So here, there's been a lot of questions on, well, how do we know we're paying the same amount as what's on the buyer broker agreement? Because we all know, we've read the rules that you cannot receive funds higher than what you have on your buyer broker agreement. So it's just kind of a little disclaimer there that this information, so line G is for informational purposes only and references an agreement between the two brokerages. It's not a part of the sales agreement. Buyer attests that the total on line 4H does not exceed the brokerage fee in set buyer representation agreement. So that's kind of the double check there. So it's It's a way that the buyer can say, wait a minute, that's not what I asked for. That's not what we agreed on. Don't be asking for more. Number one, you can't. But a buyer, it's again, demonstrating transparency. Now, the thing that what that explains in that disclosure on line 28, this this came from a lot of confusion to where, well, I thought we couldn't negotiate our commissions in a sales agreement. You can't negotiate brokerage to brokerage compensation in a sales agreement. A buyer can negotiate what they need to fulfill their duty from the seller in a sales agreement. So there's the difference, and that's why the boxes are there. So on the next page here, everything on this part of it really didn't change. I only had included them because I wanted to go over one item that is a change on the Oregon forms that I think is really valuable for a buyer, and just to keep them from having to pay an unnecessary fee. So they can either mark so many days after the due diligence period or within so many days after mutual acceptance that the buyer must order the appraisal from the lender. What this is going to do, and I think we've all been there, where a buyer gets all excited, and lenders aren't doing anything wrong. They want to get it going, but somewhere that conversation was never had, that maybe you don't want to order the appraisal until after you do an inspection, especially if it's an older home. You don't know what's going to come up on the inspection. So this allows the buyer to say, you know what, I anticipate I might have some issues here. I want to get through that inspection before we order the appraisal. For one, so we don't waste anybody's time. But for two, I don't get stuck, or maybe the lender doesn't get stuck with paying for an appraisal, that we're just going to cancel the deal. So they can say so many days after the due diligence period, making sure you're getting through that inspection period. Or it could be a cut and dry deal. It's a newer home. The buyer's feeling really confident. I just don't feel there's going to be anything serious. I want to get the appraisal. I want to get going as soon as possible. So the minute we have mutual acceptance or the day after, then I want that appraisal ordered. I think this is important for us as agents to make sure a lender understands that that's in the sales agreement, because they may not see that because these forms are new. I think a lot of lenders are very up on these forms. I've had lenders in classes also, and so I think they're aware, but I just think it needs to be noted. So, all right. So we're gonna go into some live examples on the forums, and so and if you guys have the capability and want to go onto that website, you're more than welcome to as we go through this. So I am going to share a different screen here, just so we can go through these. So now we are on the Oregon Forms website, and what this is the same tab that I had showed you earlier. And we are on the home page. This is when you pull up the website, this is where it's going to be. Okay, so you can go into the training part of it. There is a lot of training material in here for training options, self-paced training, live trainings. You can do recordings that aren't CE. You can do recordings that are, you just have to log in. If you want to be a trainer, you can do that. So I would just suggest going through here and just browsing the website if you haven't already. There's a lot of information on here. The Forms tab, this is one of the slides I had originally talked about. This is talking about our partners with the platforms. And again, you have your platform, and then that's where you get your forms. So everybody, if you are a member of the Oregon Association of Realtors, you have these forms. Okay, there's no doubt you don't. I've had people say, I don't have them. They are there. You do have to go into your library. You do have to put in your license number and to get them, but they are there, and they are accessible for you. If for some reason you cannot find them, feel free to contact. Again, this is a public facing site, so you don't have to log in to get to this site. You can go in there and say, I cannot find them, and somebody will help you. But most likely your association can help you if you, for some reason, you just can't seem to find it, or there's some kind of glitch, which there could be. Again, these are the platforms. Dot Loop, and again, Zip Forms are member benefits, SkySlope's not. You can click here and review all the forms. or you can go into update summary. And that's what we're going to go into. And when we click down here, clicking on this tab would open up all the forms that you can review, all the forms that are available. Okay, if you want to try to understand some of the updates, you can watch this video. It says right there, no CE, but you can watch it and go over it. As we come down here with the mid updates, you can do the webinars. And again, there's for CE credit or there's no CE credit. It depends on what you want to do. Sometimes you want to go in there and just look for a specific thing, or you've watched the video, you just want to go back to something, use it for your office training, whatever you want to do. But that's why they've been available like that. Okay, so here you have the tabs that have everything that has been updated for mid-year. Okay, so we're just going to go into the listing agreement. If you click on this, this is everything that was updated. So as you can see, a lot of things have changed from this. And this all changed pretty recently, prior to August 17th. Okay, so you've got everything in here. It does talk about House Bill 4058, which we covered, and some of the different changes in that. There could be some changes as that bill becomes active January 1st. So again, it doesn't hurt to get yourself familiar with this. You don't have to study the whole website, but going and knowing where to go to this to get the updates, I think is valuable. The forms, the actual purchase and sales agreement form, it says right in here, section 4, whether you're a listing agent has a separate agreement. It talks about the things we just went over in that highlighted section, but it tells you what has changed within that agreement. There's been some forms that have been removed, but anyone you click on here, it's going to give you the updates. It's going to tell you what has changed and where. That way you're not getting just an email and saying, hey, form 1.1 changed. Here's the form, familiarize yourself with it. It gives you exactly what the updates are. Again, you can click on this and view all the forms, okay? But these are the ones that have changed recently. If you were curious on what changed in January, you can go back. Same thing, you can click on any of these. It'll tell you what language changed and go over, any of the changes in any of these updated forms. Okay, so there's quite a few then. If you really want to go back and look at last year, you can do that. So in any case, that's how you use the updated portion of the website, and that is under the forms. And then you click on the updates for mid-year or whichever you're looking for. So to go back, the one thing I did want to cover that I think is really valuable is the clause library. So right here, you have a clause library. To access the clause library, you click on it. Now to get into it, to generate any kind of clause and any kind of thing you're doing, you have to log in. Okay, so I just did that. So now I am logged in to the Oregon Realtors website, and here is your clause library. So a clause library is to help you create verbiage so you're not practicing law, but it could be a situation that you don't deal with all the time. It could be something that's a little odd, or you're doing something for a reason. You want to have the right verbiage in there. You want to have your client covered, but you don't want to be like you're practicing law, putting you or your client in any kind of liability situation. So as you look down through here, there is view the forms clause library walkthrough and tutorial video. You can look through that. It'll go over it. It'll talk about how to use it. We're going to go ahead and do an example on that real quick. You have all kinds of things in here that you could come up against. Closing extension, due diligence, earnest monies. That's the easiest example I think there is. So we're going to do that one. But as you can see through here, there's many, many clauses, and you can come up against many, many more in your real estate career, of course, but they'll probably be adding to this. And if you came across a situation where you had to write some kind of clause and you thought it was important enough and it could come up again, feel free to send that in the contact link and send it to the Oregon Realtors, and they'll look at that and they'll say, okay, yes, this may be something we need to go ahead and do to add to our clause library. So say you have a situation to where, two parties, there's a situation where earnest money needs to get released. And it could be a situation where the buyer has totally released all their contingencies. However, for some unknown reason, they had to extend. Seller was like, great, okay, let's extend it for a week. And then something came up unforeseen, and they still have their proof of funds. The lender's saying, no, we're fine. It's just some kind of weird deal that they cannot close. And so to do that, the buyer's agents and the buyers are talking. They say, you know what, we don't want the sellers to get freaked out. Let's release some earnest money. So with that, we probably, a lot of you, I'm sure, have already done that. You already have your own clauses, but in case you haven't, or you just want to research this a little bit, you can click on this link. It'll take you to this page. There's a little disclosure here, and it's just saying required acknowledgement before using the clause library. And you click on that and you goes to this page right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do right here, because this is going to go back to you as a clause in verbiage that you can just put into a, obviously I can't type and talk at the same time, addendum. And so what you're going to do is you're just going to fill in the boxes, okay? So right here, it says input the earnest money amount. Just using an example, say it was 10,000 earnest money and the buyer says, you know what, let's release 5,000 to them. And this is the section it is in the sales agreement. If for some reason it's a floating home, it would be in this section, manufactured home and a floating home sales agreement. But in purchase and sales agreement, regular residential, this is the section in, so that's the section it's referring to. And then the time frame. Well, immediately is pretty tough to do because you still have to get signatures and everything else. So we're going to say, well, we're going to send this to them today, and it's the 29th. We're going to want it done on the 31st, and we want it done at 5 o'clock. Okay, so you have the time, you have the amount, you're referencing the section of the sales agreement that it's in. So you have pretty much all your bases covered. All right, you hit submit, and if this works right, and it should, it'll go right to your email. And when it goes to your email, it's going to pop up and it's going to show what that clause is. And let's just go into here and see if I get it. Let's hope I did. There it is. Okay. So you've got this that came up, unverified sender. Don't know why, but that does come up. So it says, thank you for using the Oregon Realtor Form Clause Library. Please copy and paste this, text this into a general addendum, then review and edit the clause language if needed. Now, just they put that because you could have done this. You get your clause, you get your addendum wrote up, and the buyer says, you know what? Let's do 7,500. Just, I really want to make sure the seller's okay. Then you can change that. Let's give them 2 more days. Change the date. I would not recommend changing any of the verbiage in between because that's the whole idea of this, is to get you, so you're releasing liability from you and your seller, and that you can just go ahead, copy and paste this into an addendum and send it out. Now, again, as we talked about, there are several clauses in there you can use, but this is what it would read, and this is what you would just copy and paste into your addendum, send it off, and you should be good to go. But it's just a few simple things that you have to input in there, and then you can go ahead and send that off and everything is good. Okay. I am going to go back to, let's see here. Hang tight just a second. Okay. I'm hoping that you all can see that.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So I just encourage you to go through that. The whole website of OregonForms.org will give you all kinds of information, examples, training material. You can look at every single form And it's gonna have, you can't download them from there because it'll have the little preview or the watermark on it. But um, it's a good example too if you're trying to send stuff to a client just to review. You can send them a link to the site, let them go through it, let them understand. It's public facing, so there's no hidden things there for realtors only, but it gives them good information. Okay, so a couple resources are facts.realtor. Now that one is primarily set up for realtors, okay? But it is a public facing site. But some of the verbiage and some of the things that are explained, it's more tailored to the realtor. The one down below, competition.realtor, that's they're combined now pretty much, but that was intended more for the consumer. However, it is still got the same information, the information of the lawsuits, different facts, questions, things like that to go through. The information that I pulled for the 179 ways, 105 ways, that's all on those websites and links to them. They're very valuable to use. The other resource that I wanted to mention, and that is the actual QR code. So if you wanted to take a picture of it on the screen there, it will work that way. But this is a NAR mobile app. This is not the hub. Some of you might be familiar with the hub. The hub's intended for, that's where I get my information for the NAR director information, my NAR committees, those type of things. The general NAR membership can be on the hub, but you don't have access to some of the restricted areas for committees and directors. That's not what this app is intended for. This app is intended for information, to stay connected, understanding, again, the lawsuits, same information you can find on facts.realtor and that competition.realtor, you're going to find on this app. Again, it's a public facing app. These things that you can share with your clients, it does demonstrate your value. But more importantly, it's demonstrating that you're not going to share this to a buyer or a seller and they're going to automatically become a realtor. This is not in competition. It's to give them the information and it's to show and prove your value. So the more information you're giving them, and if you think about the information overload that we take in on a daily basis, if you're giving this information, they're gonna be looking at you like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize there's all this stuff, and you're gonna prove your value just sharing some of this information. So if you wanted to share that with a client, then you know that's a public facing site. But it's a good app to have because you could be out in the field, you could be somewhere, you have this app on you, you could pull some information up, you could pull some resource sheets up if that came out. Okay. So I do kind of have this. So I'm done a few minutes early in case there's questions, but we also have some time for after questions. So I'm not going to go too much into that. I do have my information down there. So feel free, even if I'm not your DVP, if you wanted to reach out to me, I can get you in connecting with your DVP if you don't know who it is. I do answer questions for people all over. I get phone calls, I get emails. If you're wondering about my two little pictures there, this is just because of the fact that I like this as a presentation of we are definitely in a time of information overload, okay? It can be very easy to be discouraged. The human mind is just like these two fields. If you plant the top one in sweet corn and you fertilize it and water it, it's going to have a heck of a crop of sweet corn. If you do the bottom one in poison and you fertilize it and water it, it's going to be poison. The mind's the same way. You put the information in that you want to receive out. Don't get caught up in the social aspects of what's going on, all these things that you hear on social media about the changes. These things are going to better you as an agent. So what you put in, you're going to get back. And I just think it's really important that as you take this and go forward with it, you're going to find that not only can you explain your value better, but you're going to become so much more valuable to your client, buyer or seller. So again, thanks for the opportunity. And if there are questions, I'm more happy to stick around.
Yes, we do have a few excellent information, Michael. Thank you. I didn't realize there were so many resources through NAR, so that's Amazing. I wanted to point out too that here at Western Title, we do have a lot of resources, collateral, marketing materials, all relevant to the new changes, all the way down to scripting and role playing regarding objections to the new buyer agreement. So reach out to your sales executive if you'd like access to any of those. We do have a few questions regarding some of the links that were provided. Wanted to say that we will be sending out Michael's slide deck as well as the recording to all participants. So you'll have access to all of that, including the QR code that he just had up on the screen as well. Okay, so I'll dive into the Q&A now. How far back does this class action suit for sellers go back when their agent sold their home?
Oh, okay, so I don't have that link up in front of me. The one sheet that I showed you that talked about the class action suit. Okay, it does depend on the area you were in. It specifically points out different dates and timelines for specific brokerages. I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly what tab that was on, but it's in that one sheet that with the litigation sheet that I shared, and had the link below it about the class suit. Now, I can tell you, I don't believe any of them were named that were in Oregon. However, it said, and don't quote me, I don't remember the exact month, but it was in 2019 to now. Okay, so back to 2019, I want to say, I won't say, it was in 2019. So you would have to look at the tab, but it is on that tab and it does break down. There's about, I want to say 4 different sections in that say if you were in this brokerage or these are when it started. But it said for all other MLSs that properties were listed in any other MLS, 2019, I'm sorry, I just don't remember the month.
We can add it to the thing later, though.
Yeah.
Do you have any insight into how appraisers are going to handle the fact that current closed sale data includes a fee for both buyer and seller realtor compensation?
I do not. I do know that NAR and that has been a topic at some of the conferences and including, and I'm sure this fall with NAR, there's going to be probably classes and sessions on that as far as how a appraiser will look at that. I think in general, an appraiser will probably be making phone calls just to determine, and just like he does now, he or she does now with people that trying to get additional information. But to tell you exactly what they're going to do, I do not. I think primarily they will look at it as a whole. And I think that's the whole intention of this whole thing is to look at it as a whole. Everything is transparent. This is what the home sold for or what it's trying to sell for. So they're looking at it though, I can tell you that.
At what point can you write an addendum to the buyer broker agreement? So for example, if you've agreed to 2% and the listing you're writing an offer on is offering 2.5%, can you write an addendum to change your compensation to 2.5% before you write the offer?
Okay, so I just have to say this as a disclaimer. When we're talking about this in any kind of open forum, we don't want to talk about specific percentages. So I'm just going to say, if you offered X and that's what you agreed on, and then you found out that the other brokerages was offering a higher compensation, I think for working with that buyer, you have to explain to that buyer what's happening. Again, if they think that they want to compensate you more, that's their decision. To me, that's not a good practice because the fact that the reason you submitted this offer or going to submit this offer is based on what the buyer is willing to pay their broker. That's going to affect the purchase price one way or the other. I understand the question and I understand the concept and I understand the situations that are going to come up. But in my opinion, again, brokerages, offices, principal brokers are going to have their own rules. In my office, I am not allowing my agents to even have that conversation with the buyer if the seller is offering more. I think that's going to be up to your office. I can't tell you it's good or bad. As far as a time to do an amendment, if you wrote one and there's other things in there, if that's one of the things that you think needs to be changed and you want to write that, that's fine. But remember, this is an agreement between you and the buyer. The buyer doesn't agree, they don't have to sign it. So I caution you on that type of change, but you can do an amendment whenever you want.
So based on that, I'll modify this question a little bit. I saw a flyer sent to brokers only that stated buyer commission is X. Is this legal?
You can display what a seller is willing to pay for compensation outside the MLS. Okay, so if somebody is doing a flyer and taking it around to brokerages or sending it by email or however they're distributing their information, yes. Now, if they're using an email list that you got from the MLS, no. And I know that sounds odd, but you just do not want any connection with the MLS. Okay. So if you have, for whatever reason, the MLS sent you an email list, and I can't speak for all MLSs. Okay. Generally, they wouldn't do that. But if they were to, then you just have to be cautious. But if you're totally outside any MLS structure, then you are allowed to do that under the rules of NAR. I will say one more thing about that, because people talk about putting it on their website. Now, that gets very convoluted when you talk about the IDX and how that's pulled and how the information is pulled and things like that. You just have to check with your office policies and make sure you're in compliance. If you think there's any chance that's linked back to the MLS, then chances are it is. So just be very, very cautious.
So we have a couple questions regarding new construction. May a broker write in the addendum that I charge X% for resale homes and Y% for new construction?
If a buyer is fine with that, if that's the agreement, but I think that is a part you would put in the additional provisions part. No different than they're talking about a buyer, but in the additional provisions part, they could easily put something like that if the buyer's in agreement with that. Again, it really has to be defined, I think, but it's whatever the buyer agrees to do for their broker. However, I'm sorry, I will add one more thing. Do not put in your buyer broker agreement that, okay, buyer, we have agreed that you're going to pay me X for a residential property sale. However, if the cooperating broker is offering X, then you're going to pay me this. Don't do that.
So regarding new construction, builders many times offer bonus commissions. How should that be handled contractually?
There's no good answer for that other than the baseline answer. You can't accept more than what your buyer broker agreement read. Okay. So, I'm really not going to go there because there has been discussion of that. And I don't have a good answer other than the bottom line answer is just that you cannot accept more than what is stated in your buyer broker agreement.
Okay, well, we have a lot of great class. Thank you, Michael. Excellent information. So thank you again. I think that wraps up the Q&A. We do have a lot of questions again about the slides. Yes, we will send out the entire slide deck as well as a recording of the presentation. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll be following up with an email with all of Michael's contact information so you can ask him any remaining questions. Yeah, thank you for being here. Michael, do you have anything else?
Yeah, just two things I would mention is just keep in mind that this presentation, those forms I just went through very easily could change in the next week. I don't think they will, but I would expect changes come towards the end of the year. So keep that in mind. If you're looking at that and going off that, and all of a sudden you see a change, that's probably going to happen. The other thing I did want to mention is, and I thought that was going to be one of the questions, is that if you are a listing broker and somebody's wanting to see a listing, okay, you can show that, okay, under NAR guidelines and rules. If you want to show that property to a prospective buyer, you can. You need to explain to that buyer that you have no agency relationship with them. I'm showing this property behalf on my seller because I work for the seller. If after you decide that you are going further, you can get your own broker. If you want to do something with me, we will have to sit down and figure out what that is. That's a lot of gray area too, because you really have to be very careful with that. But NAR does allow that. And I mention that because of open houses. People under the impression you have to have buyer broker agreements for everybody that enters an open house. That's not the case. NAR rules, and you can look right on the facts, questions and answer sheet for the facts.realtor. It specifically says an open house is allowed because you're working on the seller's behalf. So keep that in mind. However, if you start answering questions and you start giving them information and forming a relationship, therefore you're crossing the line at that point. So that's all I will say.
Well, thank you again. We really appreciate your time and your wisdom. And as you said, everything's kind of a moving target right now, and we're all just trying to keep up. So thank you
All
again.
right. You bet. Thank you.
Have a good day.